I just wanted to quickly acknowledge that this video would not have been possible without the Facebook and Instagram page filming in McDonaldland. For one, almost all the behind the scenes pictures, concept art, specification pages, and more were taken from that page, which is an invaluable resource. But more importantly, the reason this page exists is because of Rich Seidelman, who was an art director, concept art designer, and creative lead on McDonaldland during this time. Many of his designs are what the puppeteers and set builders used, but he also has gone through the process of attempting to archive all of his and his teammates' wonderful work. So for more reasons than one, thanks Rich.
Get yourself ready for a trip through McDonaldland.
As a child, sometimes it's possible to find comfort and peace in the strangest places. For me, that place was McDonald's. Growing up about 2 minutes away from my local McDonald's, I would spend countless days there as a child. First in the play place and defunct ball pit, going to friends' birthday parties, or trying to collect all the Happy Meal toys. Then, as I got older, playing the GameCube or air hockey. However, besides this personal sanctuary, something that always enticed me about McDonald's was its characters and aesthetic. Who were these strange characters on the walls? What was this place I saw in the paintings? And what happened to it all? Well, it turns out that this place I called home was actually called McDonaldland. McDonaldland refers to McDonald's media franchise, and is a fantasy world where all the McDonald's characters live. It goes without saying that since day one, the ethics of McDonaldland has always been in question. While it's important to acknowledge the ultimate goal of McDonaldland and its success in shilling unhealthy fast food to children, I do believe that there are things to appreciate about the effort that went into building this fake world, and to only acknowledge the business side of it fails to recognize the talented and creative people who helped to create the world of McDonaldland. What McDonaldland has over other fake media franchise worlds is its lore and world building, as well as McDonald's creating multiple real, tactile experiences based around McDonaldland. Through the help of many talented art directors, puppeteers, writers, musicians, and directors, it's hard to deny the distinct and successful aesthetic that McDonald's built over many years, and its staying power, as many characters are just as recognizable today while being more or less retired. Between lawsuits and changes in laws surrounding advertising to children, McDonaldland is essentially defunct. Since its end, there have been many excellent YouTube videos explaining what McDonaldland is, what it was, and documenting its colorful cast of characters. However, I thought it would be fun to do a retrospective of McDonaldland, looking at how it morphed and developed through the decades, and how some very talented and passionate people built this colorful and interesting aesthetic and world that entranced many children. Grab my hand and let's take a trip through McDonaldland.
Get yourself ready for a trip through McDonaldland. Take along a friend and grab a hold of Ronald's hand. Follow Ronald McDonald through the land.
It's possible to pinpoint the beginnings of what would be McDonaldland as it would come to be in the first depiction of Ronald McDonald in 1963, who deserves an entire documentary about himself alone. While McDonald's did have a playful branding before this, along with their mascot, Speedy, it wasn't until the creation of Ronald McDonald that McDonald's would cement its empire. The character became popular and, after a makeover, became McDonald's mascot during the 60s and onward. While McDonaldland wouldn't be created for about another 8 years or so, the popularity of Ronald McDonald was clearly a key moment for the franchise, as the character became a household name, popularizing the fast food restaurant, and specifically, popularizing it for kids. While the character of Ronald McDonald was the starting point, the creation of McDonaldland as we know it today can be traced in 1970, as McDonald's hired ad agency Needham, Harper & Steers to create its commercials. This is where a man named Lee Marsh comes into the picture. Marsh was considered the father of McDonaldland by many who worked on the project, as he was the person from NH&S to oversee the production and creation of McDonaldland. With many talented designers, art directors, and puppeteers at the helm, the first McDonaldland commercial aired in 1971. The commercial featured 2 children following Ronald McDonald through McDonaldland. It also featured other characters who would later be known as Mayor McCheese and Officer Big Mac. All the while, an original song about McDonaldland is playing in the background. In behind-the-scenes pictures, it's clear to see that the set was very elaborate, featuring different sections and props. It was very jungle-like, and like the commercial points out, featured living creatures, many made of McDonald's items, such as the apple pie trees, French fry thatch, and a burger patch. The set was considered a 360-degree set, meaning that it was a circle that could be filmed at various angles and places depending on where the characters were. This 360-degree set is what helped make McDonaldland feel more vast and bigger than it actually was. The land had train tracks and a golden arch bridge that led straight to a McDonald's. The McDonald's in McDonaldland. This McDonald's was referred to as the portable store. It was a shallow store that would come apart in pieces and be stored until the next commercial. The set was built by EUE Screen Gems, a production company that still exists today. According to Marsh, McDonaldland stayed as a permanent set on Stage 5 at Producer Studios, now Raleigh Studios, in LA until the beginning of 1976. Then it was dismantled and put in storage, bringing out sections for further commercial use. This is where the original McDonaldland commercial was filmed in 1970. The commercial, along with the Captain Crook and Hamburglar commercials, were filmed on set and all aired in January of 1971.
I think the first shoot had something to do with with the Hamburglar stealing a train full of hamburgers.
Soon after, McDonaldland would introduce the evil Grimace, the four-armed purple monster who would torment the visitors of McDonaldland. The Goblins, who were later renamed the Fry Guys, made their debut in the 70s as well. These commercials set a strong foundation for the beginnings of McDonaldland, now with a bright and vibrant location, which many talented people helped bring to life, as well as some recognizable characters. This was the beginning of McDonaldland. One way that McDonald's sought to take McDonaldland from the screen to real life was through the McDonaldland playset. The company's set makers designed and distributed playgrounds that many McDonald's across the world would implement. Not only was the playset the perfect way to entice children to come to the restaurant, but it also featured all of the characters that children had come to know and love, providing a fun place for children and a break for parents. Although the play place featured many different iterations throughout the decades, as we will discuss, the McDonaldland's playgrounds were very popular in the 70s and are still popular today. During this time, McDonald's would start to redesign their restaurants as well, capitalize on the popular commercials. Wall art of the characters would be plastered on the walls. Paintings and wall panels depicting the Fantasyland would soon adorn the booths. Even babies had to be advertised to, as the high chairs were redesigned. It was in the early 70s that McDonald's also introduced their infamous cookies, shaped like the characters of McDonaldland. Of course, with all this came countless promotional items and toys galore. They'd also create the McDonald's game, a board game that featured all of the popular characters. The bright and immersive world had taken off, and McDonald's knew exactly how to capitalize on it. During the decade, McDonaldland saw much change and growth. One of the biggest changes came in 1973, when all the characters were redesigned. Each character had pretty significant changes to their look, but this included major changes to their personalities as well. Grimace lost 2 arms, but also became a friendly member of McDonaldland, who now helped instead of trying to steal milkshakes. This change also developed the character of the Professor, who had only had a minor role in commercials prior to this point. The lives of the characters in McDonaldland were also expanded on during this time, introducing characters such as Uncle O'Grimacy, Grimace's green Irish uncle who was used to promote the Shamrock Shake. McDonald's was going all in on McDonaldland, developing the world itself and its characters.
Who's the McFriendliest fellow in town?
A new theme song, McFavorite Clown, was recorded in 1974. There were other small changes and redesigns of minor characters. Some bigger changes between the middle of the 70s to the end was McDonald's commercials featuring more live-action segments and less of the McDonaldland set. As mentioned, the set was taken down in around 1975, and this was reflected in the commercials of the time as well, as pieces from the original McDonaldland set grew sparse in ads. This era saw the characters in a variety of sets and settings, sometimes even in the real world. While it was sad to see the original set fade away, this bred new creativity and commercials became increasingly ambitious and varied in scope, as creators would no longer rely on the old recognizable set. Unfortunately, McDonaldland left the 70s on a sour note, with a lawsuit from Sid and Marty Krofft. This has been well documented, so just to touch on it, McDonald's Corporation had supposedly talked to the Kroffts before starting the McDonaldland venture. A year or so later, the Kroffts found McDonaldland to be suspiciously like their television show, H&R Puff and Stuff. They stated similarities between the characters and the set itself. The lawsuit started in 71 and continued through the decade, ending in 1977. Long story short, McDonald's lost.
And in Sid's office, he has the check, $1 million or whatever.
There were indeed similarities between the two properties, enough so that McDonald's had to pay out, but all of these original characters were still brought to life by designers, directors, producers, and puppeteers. That's where McDonaldland truly shined, by allowing these creative people to do what they do best, world building. And despite the issues with world building at the start, the decision of this lawsuit would not be the end of McDonaldland. Not by a long shot. Early into the 80s, McDonald's would continue to develop and grow the world of McDonaldland. During this time, Mayor McCheese and Officer Big Mac more or less disappeared, only making cameo appearances. However, while these characters were lost, the 80s would introduce a plethora of new characters. The first new character of this decade would be Birdie, the early bird, who would be used to promote McDonald's growing breakfast menu. The first commercial featuring Birdie would air in 1981, and she quickly became a fan favorite. She would feature in much of the art in the restaurants and even on the cover of the new McDonaldland picnic game. However, around this time in the early 80s, McDonald's created the menu item that would revolutionize its relationship to children.
It's a hamburger or cheeseburger, regular size fries, regular size soft drink, and a McDonaldland cookie sampler. It all comes in a Happy Meal box.
There are many excellent videos and articles about the history of the Happy Meal. So, to summarize, a woman in Guatemala who ran a McDonald's created a combo that offered a meal and a sundae, along with a small toy that she'd purchased herself to entice children. This was brought to McDonald's, and they brought in a man named Bob Bernstein to help with the concept and creation of the meal on an international scale. After a couple years of testing and branding, the Happy Meal made its national debut in 1979. This would fit perfectly in the McDonaldland world, as the characters had already been turned into successful dolls and toys. The debut of the Happy Meal also brought the Happy Meal gang puppets into McDonaldland. Early Happy Meals came with cheaper spin top or doodle toys. However, it wasn't long until McDonald's upped their toy game, with the first movie tie-in, the Star Trek Happy Meal. It's hard to overstate just how significant and popular the Happy Meal would be, as it opened the floodgates for McDonald's to partner with many other IPs and companies. While I won't spend too long on Happy Meal toys because they're not really a part of McDonaldland, they did help to make children interested by correlating an IP with established ones for children, such as the major partnership with Disney later in the 80s. With its iconic box packaging adorned with the beloved characters, the Happy Meal also furthered to popularize and develop the world of McDonaldland, which had another revolutionary update in 1983. This year saw another batch of pretty significant character redesigns. One of these would be the redesign of the Fry Guys, who were reintroduced in 1983. Other redesigns in this year would be the Mad Professor, the Captain, and the Hamburger Chorus. This year also brought with it the introduction of a new menu item.
Grimace, here's some happy news about McDonald's Happy Meal.
Now, instead of a hamburger, you can get
a chicken McNugget with regular fries.
This brought the creation of the McNugget Buddies. Both the food and the characters were immensely popular, as many of the commercials throughout the 80s went on to feature the McNuggets.
For me to be able to tell people that I was a chicken McNugget, what's your favorite role? Chicken McNugget. And Tony had to teach me to marionette, basically, to get the McNugget into the barbecue cup. So I spent half an hour to 45 minutes practicing to get
the McNugget Buddies even became very popular Happy Meal toys, being featured in multiple different sets throughout the decades. Just like Birdie, the charming McNugget Buddies were here to stay. Along with these new characters and designs, the 80s also brought commercials that started expanding the lore and backstories of characters as well, explaining stories such as how the Hamburglar got his stripes, or the day that Birdie learned how to fly. The original McDonaldland set is more or less non-existent at these commercials, as the characters traveled various places and do various things, much like the end of the 70s. The 80s introduced a more cartoony foam and rubber set. The commercials of the 80s also saw a blend of practical effects and new digital technology effects.
There was one commercial where the red shoes came in dancing, just the shoes. We put the puppeteers, Tony Urbano and his gang, they were wearing the shoes and they were in blue costumes. Mapped that out and we ended up with the shoes, and this was all kind of, cutting edge new stuff.
The team behind McDonaldland spent most of the mid-80s innovating their production and cementing these new additions. The next big change in the 80s came only 3 years after the introduction of the McNugget Buddies. This year saw design changes of almost all the characters. In this year, Birdie, the Fry Guys, now the Fry Kids, Grimace, the Hamburglar, Happy Meal puppets, McNugget buddies, and Ronald himself all saw redesigns. Most of the characters became more cutesy and appealing. It's clear that the talented and thoughtful creatives behind McDonaldland were constantly trying to innovate and develop McDonaldland and its characters, and it's no question that McDonaldland would not have been as successful during its second decade if not for the awesome art produced by these people in the forms of paintings, commercials, music, and puppets. McDonaldland would close out the decade by introducing a few new characters into its world. Mac Tonight was a man with a giant moon-shaped head who'd be used to appeal to people to avail of McDonald's late-night service, which is maybe why he never actually interacted with any of the other characters, as the late-night option was more likely to be used by adults. McDonald's was also heavily featured in the 1988 film Mac and Me, which honestly deserves a video all on its own. The film was a flop and introduced the alien Mac. While these characters are not technically a part of McDonaldland, the fictional place, they are a part of McDonaldland, the media franchise. Well, it's debatable if Mac technically is. But they illustrate the grip that McDonald's had on all media, a trend that would continue to grow more during the 90s. The most significant of the new characters near the end of the 80s would be the alien Cosmic. Much like how McDonald's attempted to streamline their characters in the late 70s, cutting out less popular characters like Mary McCheese or Officer Big Mac, Cosmic's introduction coincided with the retirement of the Professor. While Cosmic was one of the more short-lived characters, he would carry McDonald's to the 80s into the 90s, and interact with other characters in McDonaldland, receiving a backstory and development such as the other characters did. Perhaps Cosmic best represents the coming decade for McDonald's, as interest in popular aesthetics were changing, and technology was about to allow McDonald's to enter new and exciting ventures to further develop McDonaldland. With the redesign of classic characters and some new favorites, the characters of McDonaldland could truly capture the hearts of America and the rest of the world. While they had lost their home, the original McDonaldland set, they had all become iconic in their own right, which would help as McDonald's continued to develop these characters into the 90s.
Hi, guys. We're having a dance party. Come on in. We got all kinds of dancing. Check it out. Do you believe in magic? See? There's ballroom dancing.
While the original McDonaldland set was nowhere to be seen in the 90s, the world that people like Rich Seidelman and Tony Urbano had developed in the 70s was still blossoming 20 years after its creation. McDonald's took this opportunity to make expansive sets in various locations throughout the 90s, introducing new puppets and characters in the process. Characters like a dragon, a vulture, and Bernice were introduced, and many commercials had a running plotline with 2 or 3 parts. One of the more notable ones would be the Making Movies storyline, featuring a living movie set and a script eaten by Bernice. While these commercials did get bigger in scope, some major developments in McDonaldland didn't happen on cable TV, but in consoles. Early into the 90s, the McDonaldland characters debuted in the newest and most exciting medium, video games. Well, actually, they debuted in 1987 in Donaldland, a Japan-only release. However, their North American release was 1992's McKids. The game was also released on Game Boy and in Europe under the name McDonaldland. This game introduced Mick and Mac, 2 playable characters in the game. Almost all of the characters in McDonaldland would make an appearance, even new ones such as Cosmic. The game received a spiritual successor, Global Gladiators, in the same year for North America. Only a year after, McDonald's Treasureland Island was released, which again featured many of the McDonaldland characters. This new medium seemed to be a successful venture, with a strong established IP in McDonaldland. Children and adults got to see the lovable cast of characters created in the 70s in a new, digital light. On the physical side of things, 1992 also saw a new specification guide with new character designs for Cosmic, as well as minor tweaks for some other characters. Puppets such as the Happy Meal puppets and the McNugget buddies would see a redesign during the 90s as well, as the puppets and costumes conceived back in the 70s still had their staying power. The late 80s into the early 90s also saw the development of indoor play places, most fitted with crawling tubes and the iconic ball pit, foosball tables, and air hockey, along with furniture and walls featuring the beloved characters. The indoor play places helped along the brand recognition to create a sanctuary for kids. This updated play place, combined with the popularity of birthday parties in the 80s and 90s, led to McDonald's being a prime location for children of the time. While McDonald's playlands and playgrounds had existed since the 70s, the tubes and ball pit became an iconic part of the restaurant, with ads even featuring these elements. As the decade went on, McDonaldland continued with ambitious commercials and ideas, integrating things such as sci-fi like the fry sniffers. Again, trying to find new ways to make McDonaldland exciting. McDonald's also released some direct-to-video animations early in the decade, such as The Adventures of Ronald McDonald, Treasureland Island, as well as Ronald McDonald Family Theater, a Christmas special hosted by Ronald. Various cassette tapes and CDs for kids were released as well. Through the TV screen, whether it be in television shows and commercials or video games, McDonaldland was hard to avoid, and kids recognized these characters much like they recognized any other popular cartoon character of the time. This idea culminated in a television show that would not debut until the late 90s. The Wacky Adventures of Ronald McDonald. With so many commercials telling stories and thorough lore of McDonaldland, this seemed to be the perfect fit for a television show. Produced by Klasky Chupo, who had many other popular Nickelodeon shows at the time, each episode started with a live-action segment which transitioned into a cartoon. Many of the characters were redesigned to match the aesthetic of the show. The show also introduced new characters into McDonaldland, such as Sunday, Ronald McDonald's talking dog. The show ran until the early 2000s, with its 6 episodes, each 40 minutes, being released as a series of individual DVDs rather than a standard television series. It was the end of the 90s that also brought a series of PC games from McDonaldland. While these games were popular among kids, they did little to develop the world building on McDonaldland, and mostly just boiled down to educational games. This lack of development was clear throughout the decade, as there were no real recognizable or popular characters added to McDonaldland. While the McDonaldland commercials were still ran by the talented creative team, McDonaldland was beginning to lose its steam. As besides a redesign for some characters in the mid to late 90s, the core group of Ronald, Grimace, Hamburglar, and Birdie carried McDonaldland through the 90s and into the early 2000s, the decade which many consider to be the slow death of McDonaldland as it was.
Yes, but, we really had some fun times, and we were lucky to be part of that.
McDonald's attempted to embrace the new millennium with open arms. They updated their play places to include extremely popular video game consoles of the time, with some receiving Nintendo 64s while most received GameCubes. They continued to have some iconic and popular Happy Meal themes, such as the Beanie Babies or Neopets. They even brought in some new cups for Happy Meals featuring McDonaldland characters. Happy Meals, birthday parties, and the play place were all still very popular. However, things were changing. In 2003, McDonald's felt it was time for a big change, starting the immensely popular I'm Loving It campaign, which wasn't really marketed towards kids. Maybe McDonald's felt that by marketing to children for the last 30 years, they had done their work. There was also many changing attitudes about McDonald's in the 2000s, such as the release of Super Size Me, the documentary that set out to expose McDonald's and its unhealthy food. Just a few years after that documentary was released, countries such as Australia cracked down on food advertising to children, implementing codes that regulated the use of things like popular characters to promote unhealthy food in children. As these codes made their way over to the United States, a place called McDonaldland didn't fare well. As McDonaldland and its characters became more and more obsolete, McDonald's began to modernize their play places. They began removing things such as ball pits for safety concerns, removing air hockey tables, the game cubes, and decor. By removing these things, McDonald's was also removing the artifacts that contained these recognizable characters. By 2008, the cups featuring the characters' faces had been removed. If you walk into a McDonald's today, it's hard to imagine the walls were ever adorned with cute cartoon characters and colorful scenery. This is why many consider the early to mid 2000s to be the death of McDonaldland. However, that isn't entirely true. Due to the internet, McDonaldland has never been more fleshed out, with access to all of the commercials, character art, and behind-the-scenes looks at its world. Through fan art and communities, people are recollecting their memories of McDonald's, and McDonaldland is still alive and well. There are McDonaldland collectors who own and fix up relics of the past. You can get a Mary McCheese Funko Pop. People like art director Rich Seidelman are archiving videos and photos and sharing stories. We live in a culture of nostalgia, and because of that, the McDonaldland characters have never been more alive. Besides being a romp through the decades of McDonaldland and how it changed and developed, I hope this video illustrates how passion and a knack for creativity is what made McDonaldland so special. This year marks 52 years since the anniversary of the original McDonaldland commercial, and still, people are talking and reminiscing or admiring the hard work and dedication that went into creating a fun and immersive world to engage its audiences. While it can be hard for some to look past the corporate wrongdoings of advertising to children, I believe it'd be unfair to argue that everyone involved in creating McDonaldland had a passion for McDonald's or for advertising to children. No, they had a passion for world building. They had a passion for making characters come to life. They had a passion for the tactile environments they made, as many of the people who worked on McDonaldland still remember details about its design and creation. The people who built McDonaldland didn't have a passion for the product. They had a passion for the magic that they could create, and so they did. And that's why, 52 years later, we don't remember every individual thing we ate at McDonald's as children, but we remember the feeling of going to one. Thanks for listening, and take it easy.
I'm so grateful that Tony took me under his wing. He was able to really make sure that all of us were professional. The stuff he taught us, really helped navigate us through show business.
And for us, it was really wonderful. It was like a family.
Here goes! Big Mac, McDLT, a quarter pounder with some cheese fillet, a fish, a hamburger, a cheeseburger, a Happy Meal, McNuggets, tasty golden french fries, regular or larger size, a salad, chef or garden, or a chicken salad, oriental, big breakfast, egg McMuffin, hot cakes and sausage, maybe biscuits, bacon, egg and cheese or sausage, Danish hash browns, 2 and 4 dessert, hot apple pies and sundaes, 3 varieties.